Hello, welcome to the seventh lesson, seventh reading. What is Hinduism? In this question, Winston Smith had used the word Hinduism and Hinduized. I do not think it is correct to use them in this way unless they are used in the widest sense of Indian culture. They are apt to mislead today when they are associated with much narrower and specifically religious concept. The word Hindu do not occur at all in our ancient literature. The first reference to it is in the an Indian book is I am told is a tantric work of the 8th century AC, where Hindu means a people and not a follower of a particular religion. But it is clear that the word is very old one, as it occurs in the Avesta and the Old Persian. It was used then and for 1,000 years or more later by the people of Western and Central Asia for India, or rather for the people living on the other side of the Indus River. The word is clearly derived from the Sindhu, the old as well as the present Indian name for the Indus. From this Sindhu, came the word Hindu and Hindustan, as well as Indus and India. The famous Chinese pilgrim Yi Sing, who came to India in the 7th century AD, writes in his record of travels that the northern tribes, that is, the people of Central Asia, called India Sindhu. But he adds, this is not at all a common name, and the most suitable name for India is the noble land, Arya. The use of the word Hindu in connection with a particular religion is of very late occurrence. The old inclusive term for religion in India was Arya Dharma. Dharma means something more than religion. It is a form of root word which means to hold together. It is the inmost constitution of a thing, the law of its inner being. It is an ethical concept which includes the moral code, righteousness, and the whole range of man's duties and responsibilities. Arya Dharma would include all the faiths, Vedic and non Vedic, that originated in India. It was used by Buddhists and Jains as well as by those who accepted the Vedas. Buddha always called his way of salvation the Arya path. The expression Vedic Dharma was also used in ancient times to signify more particularly and exclusively all those philosophies, moral teachings, rituals, and practices which were supposed to derive from the Vedas. Thus, all those who acknowledged the general authority of the Vedas could be said to belong to the Vedic Dharma. Sanatana Dharma, meaning the ancient religion, could be applied to any of the ancient Indian faiths, including Buddhism and Jainism, but the expression have been more or less monopolized today by the orthodox section among the Hindus who claim to follow the ancient faith. Buddhism and Jainism are certainly not Hinduism and even the Vedic Dharma, yet they arose in India and were an integral part of Indian life, culture, and philosophy. A Buddhist or a Jain in India is 100% product of Indian thought and culture, yet neither is a Hindu by faith. It is therefore entirely misleading to refer to Indian culture as a Hindu culture. In later ages, the culture was greatly influenced by the impact of Islam, and yet it remains basically and instinctively Indian. Today, it is experiencing in 100 ways the powerful effect of the industrial civilization which arose in the West, and it is difficult to say with any precision what is the outcome will be. Hinduism as a faith is vague, amorphous, many sided, all things to all men. It is hardly possible to define it, or indeed to say definitely whether it is a religion or not, in the usual sense of the word. In its present form, and even in the past, it embraced Many beliefs and practices from the highest to the lowest, often opposed to and contradicting each other. Its essential spirit seems to be like to live and let live. Mahatma Gandhi have attempted to define it. If I were asked to define the Hindu creed, I would simply say search after truth through non-violent means. A man may not believe in God and still call himself a Hindu. Hinduism is a relentless pursuit after truth. Hinduism is the religion of truth. Truth is God. Denial of God we have known. Denial of truth we have not known. Truth and non-violence, so say Gandhi. But many eminent and undoubted Hindus say that non-violence, as Gandhi understands it, is no essential part of Hindu creed. We thus have truth itself, left by itself, as a distinguishing mark of Hinduism. That, of course, is no definition at all. It is therefore incorrect and undesirable to use Hindu and Hinduism for Indian culture, even with reference to the distant past. Although the various aspects of thoughts as embodied in ancient writings were the dominant expression of the culture, much more is it incorrect to use those terms. In that sense, today, so long as the old faith and philosophy were chiefly a way of life and an on the world, they, they were largely synonymous with Indian culture. But what more uh, outlook of the world, they are largely synonymous with Indian culture. But when a more rigid religion developed with all manners of rituals and ceremonials, it became something more and at the same time something much less than the composite culture. A Christian or a Muslim could and often did adopt himself to the Indian way of living and culture, and yet remained in faith an Orthodox Christian or Muslim. He had Indianized himself and became an Indian without changing his religion. The correct word for Indian, as applied to country or a culture or the historical continuity of our varied tradition, is Hindi, from Hind, and shortened form of Hindustan. Hind is still commonly used in India, in the countries of Western Asia, in Iran and Turkey, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, and elsewhere. India has always been referred to and is still called Hind, and everything Indian is called Hindi. Has nothing to do with religion, and a Muslim or a Christian Indian is as much as Hindi as a person who follows Hinduism as a religion. Americans who call all Indians Hindus are not far wrong. They would be perfectly correct if they use the word Hindi. Unfortunately, the word Hindi has become associated in India with a particular script, the Devanagari script of Sanskrit, and so it has become difficult to use it in the larger and more natural concept significance. Perhaps when present day controversy subsides, it may revert to its original and more satisfying use. Today, the word Hindustani is used for Indians. It is, of course, derived from Hindustan, but this is too much of mouthful, and it has no such historical and cultural association as Hindi has. It would certainly appear odd to refer to ancient period of Indian culture as Hindustani. Whatever the word we may use, Indian or Hindi or Hindustani for our cultural traditions, we see in the past that some inner urge towards synthesis, derived essentially from Indian philosophical outlook, was the dominant feature of Indian culture and even racial development. Each incursion of foreign element was a challenge to this culture, but it was met successfully by a new synthesis and a process of absorption. This was also a process of rejuvenation, and new bloom of culture arose out of it. The background and essential basis, however, remained much the same. The earliest record scriptures in mythology. Before the discovery of Indus Valley civilization, the Vedas were supposed to be the earliest record we possessed of Indian culture. There was much dispute about the chronology of the Vedic period. European scholars usually giving later dates and Indian scholars much earlier ones. It was curious the desire of the part of Indians to go far back as possible and thus enhance the importance of our ancient culture. Professor Winter Nitz think that the beginning of Vedic culture go back to 2000 BC or even 2500 BC. This brings us very near to Mohenjo-daro period. The usual date accepted by many scholars for the hymns of Rigveda is 1500 BC, but there is a tendency ever since the Mohenjo-daro excavation to date further back these early Indian scriptures. Whatever the exact date may be, it is probable that this literature is earlier than that of either Greece or Israel. That, in fact, it represents some of the earliest documents of the human minds that we possess. Max Muller has called it the first word spoken by the Aryan man. The Vedas were the outpouring of the Aryans as they streamed into the rich land of India. They brought their ideas with them for that common stock, out of which grew the Avesta in Iran and elaborated them in the soil of India. Even the language of Vedas bears a striking resemblance to that of the Avesta, and it has been remarked that Avesta is nearer to the Vedas than the Vedas is to its own epic Sanskrit. How are we to consider the scriptures of various religions, much of it believed by the votaries to be revealed scripture? To analyze and criticize it and look upon it as a human document is often to offend the true believers. Yet there is no other way to consider it. I have always hesitated to read books of religion. The totalitarian claims made on the behalf did not appeal to me. The outward evidences of practices of religion that I saw did not encourage me to go to original sources. Yet I had to drift to these books, for ignorance of them was not a virtue and was often a severe drawback. I knew that some of them have powerfully influenced humanity, and anything that could have done so must have some inherent value and virtue in it, some vital source of energy. I found great difficulty in reading through many parts of them, for try as I would, I could not arouse sufficient interest. But the sheer beauty of some passages would hold me, and then a phrase or a sentence would suddenly leap up and electrify me and make me feel the presence of the really great. Some words of the Buddha or of Christ would shine out with deep meaning and seem to me applicable as much today as it was uttered 2000 or many years ago. There was a compelling reality about them, a permanence which time and space could not touch. So I felt something when I read about Socrates or the Chinese philosophers, and also when I read the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. I was not interested in the metaphysics or the description of rituals or the many other things which apparently had no relationship to the problems that faced me. Perhaps I did not understand the inner significance of much that I read, and sometimes indeed a second reading threw more light. I made no real effort to understand mysterious passages, and I passed by those which had no particular significance for me, nor was I interested in long commentaries and glossaries. I could not approach these books or any books or of as holy writs, which must be accepted in their totality without challenge or demur. Indeed, this approach of holy writs usually resulted in my mind being closed to what they contained. I was much more friendly and open to them when I could consider them as having been written by human beings, very wise and far seeing, but nevertheless ordinary mortals, and not incarnations or mouthpieces of a divinity, about whom I have no knowledge or surety whatever. I have always seemed to it always seemed to me much more magnificent and impressive thing that a human being could should rise to great heights mentally and spiritually, and should then seek to raise others up rather than he should be the mouthpiece of a divine or a superior power. Some of the founders of religion were astonishing individuals, but all their glory vanished in my eyes when I ceased to think of them as human beings. What impresses me and gives me hope is the growth of the mind and spirit of man, and not his being used as an agent to convey a message. Mythology affects me in much the same way. If people believe in the factual content of these stories, the whole thing was absurd and ridiculous. But as soon as one ceased believing in them, they appeared in a new light, a new beauty, a wonderful flowering of a richly endowed imagination, full of human lessons. No one believes now in the stories of Greek gods and goddesses, and so without any difficulty we can admire them and they become part of our mental heritage. But if we had to believe in them, what a burden it could be, and how oppressed by the weight of beliefs we would often miss their beauty. Indian mythology is richer, vaster, very beautiful, and full of meaning. I have often wondered what manner of men and women they were who gave shape of these bright dreams and lovely fancies, and out of what gold mine of thoughts and imagination they dug them. Looking at scriptures then is as a product of human mind, we have to remember the age in which it was written, the environment and mental climate in which it grew, the vast distance in time and thought and experiences that separated it from us. We have to forget the trappings of rituals and religious usage in which it is wrapped, and remember the social background in which it expanded. Many of the problems of human life have a permanence and a touch of eternity about them, and hence the abiding interest in these ancient books. But they deal with other problems also, limited to their particular age, which have no interest to us now. The Vedas. Many Hindus look upon the Vedas as revealed scriptures. This seemed to me to be a peculiarly unfortunate, for thus we miss their real significance. The unfolding of the human mind in the earliest stage of thought, and what a wonderful mind it was. The Vedas, from the root vid, to know, was simply meant to be a collection of the existing knowledge of the day. They are a jumble of many things: hymns, prayers, rituals, and sacrifices, magic, magnificent nature poetry. There is no idolatry to them, no temple for the gods. The vitality and affirmation of life pervaded them are extraordinary. The early Vedic Aryans were so full of the zest for life that they paid little attention to the soul. In a vague way, they believed in some kind of existence after death. Gradually, the conception of God grows. There are the Olympian type of gods and the monotheist, and later, rather mixed with it, the conception of monism. Thoughts carries them to strange realms, and brooding on nature's mystery comes and the spirit of inquiry. Their developments take place in the course of hundreds of years, and by the time we reach the end of Vedas, the Vedanta, we have the philosophy of the Upanishads. The Rig Veda, the first of the Vedas, uh, is probably the earliest book that humanity possessed. In it, we can find the first outpouring of the human mind, the glow of poetry, the rapture of nature's loveliness and mystery. And in these earlier hymns that are, as Mr. MacNicol says, the beginning of the brave adventures made so long ago and recorded here for those who seek to discover the significance of our world and of man's life within it. India has set out on a quest which she has never ceased to follow. Yet behind the Rigveda itself lays ages of civilized experience and thought, during which the Indus Valley and the Mesopotamia and other civilizations have grown. It is appropriate, therefore, that there should be the dedication in the Rigveda to the seers, our ancestors, the first pathfinders. The Vedic hymns have been described by Rabindranath Tagore as a poetic testament of a people's collective reaction to the wonder and awe of existence. A people of vigorous and unsophisticated imagination awakened at the very dawn of civilization to a sense of the inexhaustible mystery that is implicit in life. It was the simple faith of theirs that attributed divinity to every element and force of nature, but it was a brave and joyous one, in which the sense of mystery only gave enchantment to life, without weighing it down with bafflement. The faith of a race unburdened with intellectual brooding on a conflicting diversity of the objective universe, though now and again illuminated by intuitive experience as truth is one, though the wise call it by various names. But these brooding spirits crept in gradually till the authors of the Vedas cried out, O faith, endow us with belief, and raised deeper questions in a hymn called the Song of Creation, in which to which Max Miller gave the title to the unknown God. Uh, then there were not non-existent nor existent. There were no realm of air, no sky beyond it. What covered in and where, and what gave shelter, was water there, unfathomed depth of water. Death was not then, nor was there aught immortal. No signs were there, the days and nights divider. The one thing breathless, breathed by its own nature. Apart from it was nothing whatsoever. Darkness there was, at first concealed in darkness. This all was undiscriminated chaos. All the existing till then was void and formless. By the greatest power of warmth was born that unit. Thereafter rose desire in the beginning, desire, the primal seed and the germ of spirit. Sages who searched with their heart's thought discovered the existence kinship in the non-existent. Transversely was their severing line extended, what was about above it then and what below it. There were big begetters, there were mighty forces, free actions here and energy of yonder. Who verily knows and here declares it, whence it was born and whence come the creation. The God was later than the world's production. Who knows then whence it first came into being? He, the first origin of this creation, whether he formed it all or did not form it, whose eyes control the world in the highest heaven, we verily knows it, or perhaps he knows it not. The acceptance and negation of life. From the dim beginnings a long ago flowed out the river of Indian thoughts and philosophies, of Indian life and culture and literature, ever widening and increasing in volumes, and sometimes flooding the land with richer deposits. During the enormous span of years, they changed their course sometimes, and even appeared to shrivel up, yet they preserved their essential identity. They could not have done it if they have not possessed a sound instinct for life. That staying power need not necessarily be a virtue. It may well mean, as I think it has meant in India for a long time past, stagnation and decay. But it is a major fact to be reckoned with, especially in these days when we seem to be witnessing an undermining in repeated wars and crises, when we seem to be witnessing an undermining in repeated wars and crises of a proud and advanced civilization. Out of this crucible of war, wherein so much is melting, we hope that something finer will emerge for the West as well as for the East, something that will retain all the greatest achievements of humanity and add to them what they lack. But this repeated and widespread destruction, not only of material resources and human life, but of essential values that have given meaning to life, is significant. Was it that, in spite of astounding progress in numerous directions and the higher standards undreamed of in previous ages, that came in its train, our modern, highly industrialized civilization did not possess some essential ingredients, and that the seed of self destruction laid within it? A country under foreign domination seeks escape from the present in dreams of a vanished age and finds consolation in vision of past greatness. This is foolish and dangerous pastime in which many of us indulge. An equally questionable practice for us in India is to imagine that we are still spiritually great, though we have come down in the world in other respects. Spiritual or any other greatness could be found on lack of freedom and opportunity, cannot be founded on lack of freedom of and opportunity, or on starvation and misery. Many Western writers have encouraged the notion that Indians are otherworldly. I suppose the poor and unfortunate in every country become to some extent otherworldly, unless they become revolutionaries, for this world is evidently not meant for them, so also subject peoples. As a man grows to maturity, he is not entirely engrossed in or satisfied with the external objective world. He seeks also some inner meaning, some psychological and physical satisfaction. So also with people and civilization as they mature and grow old adult. Every civilization and every people exhibit these parallel streams of an external life and an internal life. Where they meet or keep close to each other, there is an equilibrium and stability. When they diverge, conflict arises, and this the crisis that tortures and the mind and spirit. We see that the period of Rigveda hymns onward the development of both the streams of life and thought. The early men ones are full of the external world, of the beauty and mystery of nature, of joy and life, and the overflowing vitality. The gods and goddesses, like those of Olympus, are very human. They are supposed to come down and mix with man and woman. There is no hard and fast lining dividing the two. The thought comes and the spirit of inquiry and the mystery of a transcendental world deepens. Life still continues in abundant measure, but there is also a turning away from its outward manifestation and a spirit of detachment growing as the eyes are turned into things invisible, which cannot be seen or heard of or felt in an ordinary way. What is the object of it all? Is there a purpose in the universe? And if so, how can man's life be put into harmony with it? Can we bring about a harmonious relationship between the visible and invisible world and thus find out the right conduct of life? So, we find in India or elsewhere the two streams of thought actions, the exception of life and the absenteeism from it, developing side by side with the emphasis on the one or the other varying in different periods. Yet the basic understanding of the culture was not one or other, worldliness or worthlessness. Even when in philosophical language it discussed the word world as Maya, or what is popularly believed to be an illusion. The very conception was not an absolute one, but relative to what was thought of as ultimate reality, something like Plato's shadow of reality. And it took the world as it is and tried to live in life and enjoy its manifold beauty. Probably Semitic culture, as exemplified in many religions that emerged from it, was certainly early Christianity were far more otherworldly. T. E. Lawrence said that the common base of all Semitic creeds, winners or losers, was the ever present idea of the world worthlessness, and this often led to an alteration of self indulgence and self denial. In India, we find during every period when her civilization bloomed an intense joy of life and nature, a pleasure in the act of living. The development of art and music and literature and songs and dancing and paintings and the theater, and even a higher sophisticated inquiry into sex relations. It is inconceivable that a culture or a view of life based on otherworldliness and world worthlessness could have produced all these manifestations of vigorous and varied life. Indeed, it should be obvious that any culture that was basically otherworldly would not have carried on for thousands of years. Yet, some people have thought that Indian thought and culture represent essentially the principle of life negation and not of life affirmation. Both principles are, I suppose, present in various degrees in all the old religions and cultures. But I suppose I should have thought that Indian culture, taken as a whole, never emphasized the negation of life, though some of the philosophers did so. It seemed to have done so much less than Christianity. Buddhism and Jainism rather emphasized the absenteeism from life, and in certain periods of Indian history, there was a running away from life on a big scale, as for instance, when large number of people joined the Buddhist viharas or monasteries. What the reason for this was, I do not know. Equally or more significant instances can be found in the Middle Ages in Europe, when a widespread belief existed in the world was coming to an end. Perhaps the idea of renunciation and life negation are caused or emphasized by a feeling of frustration due to political and economic factors. Buddhism, in spite of its theoretical approach, or rather approaches, for there are several, as a matter of fact, avoids extremes. It is the doctrine of golden mean, the mean path. Even the idea of nirvana was very far from being kind of nothingness, as it is something sometimes supposed to be. It is a positive condition, but because it was beyond the range of human thought, negative terms were used to describe it. If Buddhism is a typical product of Indian thought and culture, had merely been a doctrine of life negation or denial, it would surely have been some such effect on the hundreds of millions who profess it. Yet, as a matter of fact, the Buddhist countries are full of evidences to the contrary, and the Chinese people are an outstanding example of what affirmation of life can be. The confusion seems to have arisen from the fact that Indian thought have been have also laid stress on the ultimate purpose of life. It could never forget the transcendental element in its makeup, and so while affirming life to the full, it refused to become a victim and a slave of life. Indulge in right actions with all strength and energy, it said, but keep above it, and do not worry much about the result of such action. Thus, it taught detachment in life and action, not abstention from them. This does this idea of detachment runs through Indian thought and philosophy, as it does through most other philosophies. It is another way of saying that a right balance and equilibrium should be kept between the visible and the invisible world. For if there is too much attachment to actions in the visible world, the other world is forgotten and fades away, and action itself becomes without ultimate purpose. There is an emphasis on truth or a dependence on it, passion for it. In these early adventures of the Indian minds, dogmas or revelations are passed by as something for lesser mind, which cannot rise above them. The approach was one of experiment based on personal experience. That experience, when it dealt with the invisible world, was like all emotional and psychic experiences, different from the experience of visible external world. It seems to go out of the three-dimensional world we know into some different and vast realm, and was thus difficult to describe in terms of three dimensions. What that experience was, and whether it was a vision of realization of some aspect of truth and reality, or was merely a phantasm of the imagination, I do not know. Probably it was often self delusion. What interests me more is the approach, which was not authoritarian or dogmatic, but was an attempt to discover for oneself what lays behind the external aspect of life. It must be remembered that the business of philosophy in India was not confined to a few philosophers or Hig bros. Philosophy was an essential part of the religion of the masses. It percolated to them in some attenuated form and created the philosophical outlook which became nearly as common in India as it was in China. That philosophy was for some a deep and integrate attempt to know the cause and laws of all phenomena, the search for the ultimate purpose of life, and the attempt to find an organic unity in life's many contradictions. But for the many, it was a much simpler affair, which yet gave them some sense of purpose of cause and effect, and endowed them with courage to face trial and misfortune, and not lose their gaiety and composure. The ancient wisdom of China and India, the Tao or the true path, wrote Tagore to Mr. Tai Chit Tao, was the pursuit of completeness, the blending of life's diverse works with the joy of living. Something of the wisdom impressed itself even through upon the illiterate and ignorant masses, and we have seen how the Chinese people, after several years of horrible war, had not lost the anchor of their faith or the gaiety of their minds. In India, our trials have been more drawn out, and poverty and uttermost misery have long been the inseparable companions of our people, and yet they still laugh and sing and dance and do not lose hope. That's it for today.